Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sealess Social Studies. Today we're going to be talking about the Great Plains and Native Americans. So as settlers moved out west in the mid-1800s, there were issues that arose amongst the Native Americans and the traveling migrants. One problem that arose was the buffalo problem. Plains Indians, including the Sioux, Pawnee, and Cheyenne, made a living hunting buffalo. It was used for most activities in the daily life of the Native Americans. Buffalo was used for food, shelter, clothing, and even utensils. The natives would waste no part of the buffalo at all. When the American settlers moved west, there was a desire to kill the buffalo for several reasons. The American settlers killed the buffalo because it was hampering the expansion of the railroad. Buffalo were constantly being a nuisance to rail cars, herding across the tracks and stalling transportation. Sometimes the herds numbered in the millions and spanned many miles long and wide. It would sometimes take hours for the herd to move past on the tracks. The next reason was that some settlers felt that if they were able to rid the plains of the buffalo, they would solve the native problem. The conflict grew with the Plains Indians as miners and settlers increased in number. And the final reason was that the settlers used the buffalo for a food source as well. During the expansion of the United States, the American government negotiated treaties with the Plains Indians to gain more western land for settlers. The treaties were often unfair to the natives on many different levels. The treaties offered Native Americans money for their lands that did not meet land value. There were treaties that were unfair because of language barriers as well as trickery. The United States government wanted to gain control of the land at any cost. In 1851, the Treaty of Fort Laramie recognized the Native Americans' claims to the Great Plains. The only stipulation was that the United States government could build forts and travel across the Native American lands without being attacked. This was only temporary until the discovery of gold in the Black Hills. The United States government would often renegotiate old treaties or even negotiated new treaties, sending Native Americans to live on reservations, which were areas of federal land set aside for them. Sarawinnamuka, which was a Paiute native, called for reform for Native Americans in the 1870s. Most Southern Plains Indians agreed to go to reservations until the 1867 Treaty of Medicine Lodge and the Second Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868. However, the movement of pioneers and miners across the Great Plains and through Native American hunting grounds led to conflict with the Sioux Indians led by Crazy Horse. When the Native Americans resisted confinement on reservations, the government sent in the army and again led a forced removal of the natives to Indian reservations. The soldiers sent to corral the natives include the famous African American cavalry called the Buffalo Soldiers. These soldiers helped protect the settlers and fight the Native Americans. Most Native Americans had stopped fighting by the 1880s except the Apache, led by Geronimo, who fought until 1886. In the northern plains, there were famous battles with the Sioux. In 1876, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, in order to protect gold miners, led troops to destroy the Lakota Sioux in South Dakota. Custer took his 200 soldiers into battle against some 2,000 well-equipped Sioux forces led by Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Custer and all of his men were killed that day, cementing Custer in history while the battle being the Sioux's last major victory over the American army. Later, in retaliation to Custer's last stand, the U.S. troops killed about 150 Sioux, including women and children, in the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890. In the western part of the United States, the Navajo people refused to settle on reservations. This ultimately led to their demise. U.S. troops raided Navajo fields, homes, and livestock and left the Navajo with nothing. Out of food and shelter, the Navajo surrendered. The U.S. Army forced the Navajo on a 300-mile march known as the Lawn Walk to a reservation, and countless Navajo died. The story of the Northwest Nez Perce tribe and the United States government is one of betrayal. First, the U.S. promised to let the Nez Perce keep their Oregon land. This was until settlers wanted to use the same land that the natives were promised. The government sided with the settlers. They then demanded that the land come from the natives, and the natives fighting ensued, and the U.S. troops forced the Nez Perce to a reservation in Oklahoma, where many of them died. As a result, the natives needed a way to deal with all of the betrayal and hard luck. They created what we call the Ghost Dance movement that predicted the arrival of paradise for Native Americans. This was misunderstood by U.S. officials who feared it would lead to a rebellion. There were many times that skirmishes could have broken out, but it gradually died out after the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. One way that the United States government tried to assimilate the Native Americans to whiteness was the Dawes General Allotment Act. This act made land ownership among Native Americans private. Usually, Native Americans did not practice private land ownership. They would share the land and have communal gardens and hunting grounds. The idea of private land ownership, along with the forced spread of Christianity, tried to encourage the Native Americans to lessen their traditional influences and to encourage them to adopt the ways of the white people. The act also resulted in taking about 2/3 of Native American lands. All right, I'll see you next time.